Racist cop targets black woman unaware she's the strategist coordinating parallel probes into his corruption. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to the main character. Officer Daniel Crowley had been wearing the same confident expression for years. The kind that came from knowing the system rarely pushed back. The kind that let him move through a municipal building as if the halls belonged to him. On a mild Tuesday morning, under fluorescent lights that hummed like distant insects, he noticed Amara Collins for the first time and decided, almost casually, that she would be an easy target. She stood near the intake counter with a slim folder held close to her chest. Posture straight, voice measured, eyes attentive but calm. To Crowley, her composure read as defiance. To everyone else, it looked like patience. He approached with a practiced stride, boots tapping the tile at a steady rhythm, and spoke with a tone that suggested he expected compliance before he finished his sentence. He asked questions that were unnecessary, repeated requests she had already answered, and leaned just close enough to test boundaries without crossing any lines that could be clearly documented. Amara responded the same way each time. Politely, precisely, offering what was required and nothing more. The exchange drew glances from clerks and passers-by. The sort of quiet attention that forms when something feels off but no one wants to be the first to say it. Crowley felt that attention and leaned into it, confident that his badge carried weight even when his words did not. He made a remark about procedure, then another about authorization, then a third that implied she didn't quite belong in this space. Amara listened, nodded once, and waited. What Crowley could not see was the discipline in her stillness. The way her mind tracked details the way others tracked time. She noticed the names on the doors, the cadence of his speech, the exact moment he glanced toward a camera before adjusting his stance. She noticed which colleagues avoided eye contact and which pretended to be busy. To Crowley, the moment felt routine. Another brief assertion of authority that would fade by lunchtime. To Amara, it was one more data point aligning with patterns already mapped. Outside the building, traffic rolled past in steady waves. Engines idling at the light. A city moving on schedule. Inside, Crowley pressed once more, confident that pressure would produce the reaction he wanted. Amara thanked him for the clarification, requested a receipt for her submission, and stepped aside without argument. The simplicity of her response unsettled him. He watched her leave the counter. Not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, and felt a flicker of irritation he could not place. What he did not know, and what the room could not hear, was that the folder she carried was the smallest piece of a much larger design. That parallel reviews were already in motion, quiet and methodical, spanning offices that never announced themselves. As Amara walked down the corridor, the hum of the lights followed her, and the building returned to its ordinary rhythm. Unaware that the story had already begun, the municipal building settled back into its usual rhythm after Amara Collins stepped away from the counter. A rhythm built on routines, forms, and quiet assumptions that rarely faced scrutiny. Officer Daniel Crowley returned to his desk with a sense of mild triumph. The kind that came from believing he had reminded someone of their place without leaving any marks that could be questioned later. He logged a note into the system, brief and carefully worded, confident that words typed with authority carried more weight than truth spoken softly. Around him, phones rang, printers hummed, and colleagues moved through their tasks with practiced efficiency. none of them asking why the exchange had felt heavier than it needed to be. Amara walked down the corridor toward the exit, her pace unhurried, her breathing steady, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. To an observer, she looked like any professional navigating a government office. But her attention remained sharp, cataloging the environment with quiet precision. She noted the placement of security cameras, the timing of badge scans, the way Crowley's voice shifted when he believed he was being overheard. Outside, the air was cool, the sky pale and clear, traffic flowing at a steady 30 miles per hour along the avenue. She paused near the steps, adjusted the strap of her bag, and took in the scene as if committing it to memory. Crowley, watching from inside through the glass, told himself he had handled the situation correctly. He replayed the interaction in his mind, convinced that control had been maintained and that any discomfort he sensed was simply resistance meeting authority. He did not consider the possibility that control could be observed without being challenged, or that patience could be a form of leverage. Later that afternoon, Amara sat in a quiet cafe a few blocks away, the low murmur of conversation blending with the soft clink of cups. She opened her folder, not to review its contents, but to check the timestamps she had marked earlier. Her phone vibrated once, then again, brief notifications that required no reply. She closed the folder, paid her bill, and stepped back onto the sidewalk, blending into the flow of pedestrians. Meanwhile, Crowley attended a routine briefing, leaning back in his chair as updates were delivered, his attention drifting when topics did not concern him directly. He laughed at a familiar joke, nodded at familiar faces, and felt reassured by the predictability of it all. The idea that systems could move beyond his line of sight did not cross his mind. As evening approached, Amara returned home, placing her bag on the table and making notes from memory. Details captured not as complaints but as confirmations. Names, times, tones of voice, all arranged with care. She sent a single message, concise and neutral, and received a confirmation that required no elaboration. Across town, Crowley ended his shift and drove home, radio playing softly, streets lit by the glow of storefronts and traffic signals. He felt satisfied, unaware that the ordinary day he was leaving behind had already been logged, cross-referenced, and quietly set in sequence. The city continued to move, unaware that parallel processes were aligning beneath its surface, not with urgency or noise, but with the steady confidence of people who understood that timing mattered more than force. By the next morning, Amara Collins moved through her routine with the same measured calm that had defined her the day before, rising before sunrise, preparing coffee, and reviewing her schedule without urgency. She dressed simply, choosing clothes that blended into any professional setting. Nothing that invited attention, everything that allowed her to move unnoticed. To those who crossed her path, she appeared unremarkable, another woman navigating the obligations of work and life. Yet beneath that ordinary exterior was a discipline shaped by years of observation and restraint. She believed that dignity was not something granted by institutions but something carried internally, especially when tested. As she stepped outside, the neighborhood was waking up, sprinklers ticking across lawns, delivery trucks idling, the smell of fresh bread drifting from a nearby bakery. She walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, noting the time it took for traffic to clear the intersection, the pattern of pedestrians, the subtle ways people adjusted their behavior around uniforms and authority. Across town, Officer Daniel Crowley began his shift with the same confidence he always carried, greeting colleagues, joking lightly, and settling into his chair as if it were an extension of himself. He glanced at the daily assignments and felt reassured by their familiarity, unaware that familiarity itself could be a vulnerability. Amara arrived at another municipal office later that morning, passing through security with a polite nod. Her expression neutral, her posture steady. She waited her turn, listening more than speaking, allowing conversations to unfold around her. When addressed, she responded clearly and concisely. Never defensive, never apologetic. People often mistook her calm for compliance. But it was simply control. A way of choosing when to engage and when to remain silent. As she sat in the waiting area, she watched the interactions between staff and visitors, noticing who was treated with patience and who was met with suspicion. Each exchange added context, not as judgment, but as understanding. During a brief lunch break, she sat alone at a small park, sunlight filtering through the trees, children laughing in the distance, a jogger passing every few minutes. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing evenly, grounding herself in the present. This stillness was not retreat, but preparation. She believed that clarity came from quiet, not confrontation. Meanwhile, Crowley encountered minor frustrations throughout the day. A delayed response, a form returned for revision, small inconveniences that chipped at his patience. He dismissed them quickly, attributing them to inefficiency rather than pattern. The thought of being observed never entered his mind. As the afternoon wore on, Amara made a brief phone call, her voice low and composed, confirming details without elaboration. She did not need to explain herself to those who already understood the framework she operated within. Her role was not to act, but to align, to ensure that information moved cleanly and without distortion. When the call ended, she sat for a moment longer, watching leaves shift in the breeze, reflecting on the importance of timing. She knew that exposure without preparation led to noise, not change. As evening approached, she returned home, placing her notes in a secure place. Not because she feared loss, but because she respected process. Across the city, Crowley locked his desk and headed out, convinced that his day had been ordinary, unaware that what he perceived as uneventful was precisely what allowed unseen work to continue. In the quiet spaces between actions, Amara's resolve remained steady, anchored not in anger, but in the certainty that patience, when paired with truth, had a way of reshaping outcomes. The tension that had lingered quietly now began to surface in subtle ways that most people would overlook. But Amara Collins recognized immediately. When she returned to the municipal building later that week, the atmosphere felt slightly altered. Not louder or harsher, just tighter, as if the air itself had learned to hold its breath. Conversations paused a fraction too long when she approached. Eyes flickered toward her and then away, and procedures that once flowed smoothly now required extra confirmation. She understood this shift not as coincidence but as reaction. Officer Daniel Crowley noticed it too, though he interpreted it differently. To him, the increased scrutiny felt like resistance, an unspoken challenge to his authority that irritated him more than he cared to admit. He found reasons to question routine requests, insisting on additional documentation, repeating instructions in a tone that suggested he expected mistakes. Each interaction with Amara carried an edge, his words carefully chosen to remain within policy while still asserting dominance. Amara responded as she always did, with calm precision, neither defensive nor confrontational, her voice steady, her posture unchanged. She thanked him for clarifications, acknowledged procedures, and complied where required, offering no reaction that could be used against her. This restraint frustrated Crowley. He was accustomed to reactions, to visible discomfort or impatience, signs that his presence mattered. Her composure denied him that satisfaction. As days passed, Crowley began to single her out more frequently, not overtly, but through timing and emphasis, questioning her submissions before others, delaying approvals that should have been routine. Colleagues noticed but said nothing, choosing comfort over involvement. Amara noticed as well, marking each instance internally, not as a personal slight but as further confirmation of behavior patterns already documented. Elsewhere, outside of these encounters, her life remained deliberately ordinary. She ran errands, prepared meals, and maintained her routines, grounding herself in normalcy. Yet beneath that surface, information continued to align. Emails were sent, phone calls returned, and records cross-referenced, all without urgency or dramatics. She understood that escalation did not require confrontation, only consistency. Crowley, meanwhile, grew more confident in his assumptions. He believed that his increased pressure was working, that she would eventually withdraw or make a mistake. He joked with colleagues about professionalism, framing his actions as diligence rather than fixation. The system, as he saw it, supported him. What he did not see were the quiet adjustments happening beyond his reach. The way timelines overlapped, and how separate reviews began to echo the same concerns. One afternoon, Amara waited in a small conference room, the clock ticking softly on the wall. Crowley entered late, carrying himself with practiced authority. Offering no apology, he spoke at length about procedures. His voice controlled, his gaze unwavering. Amara listened without interruption, nodding once when appropriate, her expression neutral. When it was her turn to speak, she responded briefly, addressing each point with clarity, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The room fell quiet, not because of what was said, but because of what was not. Crowley sensed it, an absence of the reaction he expected, and felt an unfamiliar unease settle in his chest after the meeting. Amara gathered her materials and left without hesitation, her steps measured, her focus intact. She did not look back. Crowley remained seated for a moment longer than necessary, staring at the door as it closed. He told himself the tension was temporary, that control would reassert itself. Yet somewhere beneath that confidence, a doubt began to form. Small and easily dismissed, but persistent. Amara, walking into the late afternoon light, felt no satisfaction, only certainty. The process was unfolding as designed, each measured response tightening a structure that required no force to hold. The pressure was no longer hers to bear alone, and that knowledge allowed her to move forward with quiet resolve. By the following week, the quiet mechanisms Amara Collins had set in motion began to reveal themselves through small, almost invisible shifts that only someone trained to notice patterns would recognize. Emails that once went unanswered now received careful replies, not from the same offices, but from parallel departments that rarely intersected. Requests for routine verification arrived with neutral language, precise phrasing, and unfamiliar signatures. Amara read them without expression, understanding exactly what they meant. The groundwork was being acknowledged. She continued her days as before, arriving on time, leaving without haste, speaking only when necessary. Her restraint was intentional, designed to allow others to move freely into their roles without drawing attention to her own. Officer Daniel Crowley sensed the change as well. Though he could not name it, he noticed delays that did not originate from his usual channels, inquiries that referenced procedures he had not considered relevant, and a subtle hesitation in conversations where there had once been ease. He dismissed these signs as administrative noise, the kind that surfaced during audits or seasonal reviews. To reassure himself, he doubled down on routine, documenting everything with meticulous care, convinced that thoroughness equaled protection. What he did not realize was that thoroughness, when observed from multiple angles, could also reveal inconsistencies. Amara spent one evening reviewing timelines at her kitchen table, a single lamp casting a soft circle of light. She did not rush, aligning dates and interactions with a calm confidence that came from experience. Each entry represented a thread, and she could see how they converged without needing to pull them together herself. She made a brief note, then closed the folder, satisfied that the structure was holding. Across town, Crowley attended a meeting where an unfamiliar representative sat quietly at the edge of the room, asking thoughtful questions that required careful answers. Crowley responded smoothly, unaware that his words were being weighed not for tone, but for alignment with existing records. He left the meeting feeling slightly unsettled, unable to pinpoint why. The representative had thanked him politely and offered no reaction that might suggest concern. That neutrality lingered with him longer than criticism ever had. The next day, Amara received a message that contained no details, only a confirmation that timelines were syncing as expected. She acknowledged it with a single word and returned to her routine. In public, she remained indistinguishable from anyone else moving through the city, waiting at crosswalks, standing in line, exchanging brief pleasantries. In private, she maintained her discipline, trusting the process she had helped design. Crowley, meanwhile, found himself replaying conversations in his mind, searching for missteps that might explain the unease he felt. He found none and concluded that the discomfort was simply the result of increased workload. He reassured himself that his record spoke for itself. He did not consider that records, when examined together, could tell a different story. One afternoon, as Amara walked past the municipal building, she paused briefly to watch people enter and exit, their faces set with purpose or distraction. She felt no anticipation, only clarity. The system was responding exactly as it should, not with confrontation, but with coordination. Crowley, inside his office, closed a file and leaned back in his chair, telling himself that the pressure would pass. He had no reason to believe otherwise. Yet the space around him felt subtly altered, as if the walls were listening. Amara resumed her walk, blending into the city once more, confident that the threads she had woven were tightening not around a person, but around the truth itself. And that truth, once aligned, required no force to hold. As the weeks aligned, the story beneath the surface became clearer. Not through spectacle, but through structure. And this was where Amara Collins had always been most at home. Long before she ever crossed paths with Officer Daniel Crowley, she had learned that real accountability rarely announced itself. It moved quietly, through calendars, jurisdictional overlaps, and people who knew how to listen more than they spoke. Amara was not assigned to a single office or bound to one badge. Her work lived in the margins between agencies, where assumptions often went unchallenged and coordination was the missing piece. She understood how to map behavior across time, how to let separate inquiries run independently while ensuring they pointed toward the same center. To those involved, she was simply a name on a distribution list, a neutral presence who asked for clarification and offered alignment. No one needed to know the full picture, only their role within it. When she reviewed Crowley's record, she did not start with accusations. She started with patterns, small discrepancies in reporting language, timing that did not quite match, informal practices that relied too heavily on familiarity. Each detail alone meant little, but together they formed a shape she recognized. She shared these observations carefully, framing them as routine cross-checks rather than conclusions. This approach allowed multiple reviews to proceed without interference, each one validating the others without coordination being obvious. Meanwhile, Crowley felt the weight of scrutiny without seeing its source. He responded by tightening his routine, believing consistency would shield him. He kept his language precise, his documentation thorough, unaware that thoroughness only provided more material for comparison. He reassured himself that nothing he had done violated policy in isolation. What he did not consider was how isolation dissolved when records were viewed side by side. Amara continued her daily life with deliberate normalcy, attending meetings where she spoke sparingly, offering summaries that connected dots without drawing lines. She believed that truth revealed itself best when allowed to emerge naturally, without pressure. In one conference call, she listened as representatives from different departments discussed similar concerns using different terms. She asked a single question that prompted clarification, then remained silent as the realization settled among them. No one mentioned Crowley by name. They did not need to. The framework was already in place. Crowley, on the other hand, began to sense that conversations changed when he entered a room. The shift was subtle. A pause here, a careful choice of words there. He attributed it to stress, to the natural ebb and flow of office dynamics. He did not imagine that the same behaviors he had dismissed in others were now being noted about him. One evening, Amara reviewed a consolidated timeline, the culmination of weeks of parallel movement. She saw how independent inquiries converged without direct contact, each reinforcing the same conclusions. She felt no triumph, only confirmation. This was the outcome she had planned for, not because it targeted an individual, but because it respected process. Her role was never to accuse, only to ensure that systems communicated honestly with themselves. As she closed her notebook, she reflected on the discipline required to remain unseen while shaping outcomes. Crowley drove home that night with the radio off, the silence amplifying his thoughts. He told himself that nothing concrete had changed, yet the certainty he once relied on felt thinner. He did not know that the groundwork had already been laid, that the story of his conduct was now being told through records rather than voices. Amara, preparing for the next phase, understood that revelation did not begin with confrontation, but with alignment, and alignment, once achieved, made the truth impossible to ignore. The moment of reveal did not arrive with raised voices or sudden announcements, but through a quiet shift that changed everything. Officer Daniel Crowley believed he understood. It began with a request for his presence at a routine review meeting, scheduled without urgency and framed as procedural. Crowley entered the room expecting familiarity, yet immediately sensed the difference in the air. The faces around the table were attentive but reserved, their expressions neutral in a way that offered no reassurance. Amara Collins sat among them, composed as always, her posture relaxed, her attention focused not on him but on the documents laid out neatly before her. Crowley took his seat, offering a confident greeting that went unanswered, and for the first time, he felt the absence of control he had long taken for granted. The meeting progressed methodically, questions asked with precision, timelines reviewed without commentary, and records presented without accusation. Crowley responded carefully, choosing his words with practiced ease. Yet each answer seemed to settle into the room with unexpected weight. He noticed how Amara listened, not reacting, not interrupting, simply observing as if confirming something already known. When the discussion reached a pause, a senior official acknowledged her presence and invited her to speak. Amara lifted her gaze calmly, meeting the room with quiet authority. She did not introduce herself with titles or credentials, but with clarity, explaining how the reviews underway were connected, how independent inquiries had aligned through shared data and consistent patterns. As she spoke, the room seemed to lean inward, not toward her, but toward the truth she articulated with measured restraint. Crowley felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. He realized, piece by piece, that the woman he had dismissed as peripheral was central, not as an adversary, but as the architect of the process unfolding before him. Her words were careful, devoid of judgment, yet impossible to ignore. She outlined how coordination ensured fairness, how parallel reviews protected integrity, and how accountability emerged naturally when systems communicated honestly. No one raised their voice. No one accused. Yet Crowley understood, with startling clarity, that the ground beneath him had shifted irrevocably. The authority he relied on was no longer his alone to define. The meeting concluded without drama. Instructions issued calmly. Next steps outlined with professionalism. As people gathered their papers, Crowley remained seated for a moment longer. The reality settling in, he finally looked at Amara, seeing not the target he once imagined, but the strategist who had never needed to confront him directly. She met his gaze briefly, not with triumph or resentment, but with the same calm she had always carried, a reflection of discipline rather than emotion. As she stood to leave, she offered no parting words, because none were necessary. Crowley watched her exit, the significance of her role now unmistakable. The building felt quieter than before, not because something had ended, but because something had been revealed. Amara stepped into the hallway, her pace steady, her focus forward. The work she had coordinated would continue without her needing to remain at its center. Crowley, left behind, understood too late that power exercised without awareness could be undone by patience and alignment. In that realization, the story shifted, not through confrontation, but through the undeniable clarity of truth made visible at last. The consequences unfolded without spectacle, moving forward with the same restraint that had defined the process from the beginning. After the meeting, Officer Daniel Crowley received formal notifications that were calm in tone and precise in language, outlining procedural steps and temporary adjustments to his duties. There were no accusations in the documents, only references to reviews, standard protocols, and the need for transparency while assessments continued. Crowley read them slowly, recognizing the care with which each word had been chosen. The familiar comfort of certainty slipped away, replaced by a quiet understanding that decisions were no longer his to influence. Within the department, routines shifted subtly, files were reassigned, approvals rerouted, and conversations that once happened casually were now documented with care. Crowley noticed colleagues maintaining polite distance, not out of hostility, but caution. Their professionalism remained intact, yet the ease he once enjoyed was gone. He realized that authority depended not only on position, but on trust, and trust, once questioned, required more than confidence to restore. Amara Collins continued her work with the same deliberate normalcy, attending meetings where her presence was acknowledged but not emphasized. She offered summaries when requested and stepped back when her role was complete. She understood that accountability did not require her constant involvement. The systems she helped align were now functioning as intended, responding to information rather than personalities. One afternoon, she walked past the municipal building again, observing the familiar flow of people entering and exiting, each carrying their own concerns and routines. The building looked unchanged, yet its internal balance had shifted. Crowley, inside, sorted through records with a focus he had not needed before. Aware that every action now existed within a broader context, he reflected on past assumptions, moments he had dismissed as insignificant, and the ease with which he had mistaken control for stability. The realization was uncomfortable but unavoidable. Across departments, parallel reviews reached their conclusions independently, each confirming the same findings without coordination or pressure. The alignment was undeniable, not because it was dramatic, but because it was consistent. Crowley received updates that emphasized next steps and professional expectations, leaving little room for argument. He complied, recognizing that resistance would only confirm what had already been established. Amara received confirmation that the reviews had concluded. their outcomes documented and shared through appropriate channels. She acknowledged the message and returned to her routine. Her role complete, she felt no need to revisit the past interactions that had set events in motion. The work had never been about confrontation, but about integrity. In the weeks that followed, Crowley adjusted to a new reality, one where authority required reflection and accountability rather than assumption. He found himself listening more, questioning his own interpretations, and recognizing the limits of his perspective. The process had not humiliated him, but it had clarified something he had long ignored. Amara, moving through her days with quiet purpose, remained unseen by most. Just as she preferred, the outcomes she helped shape spoke for themselves. Requiring no acknowledgement, the city continued its steady rhythm, unaware of the careful recalibration that had taken place within its institutions. In that quiet aftermath, justice did not arrive as punishment or triumph, but as balance restored, achieved through patience, alignment, and the simple power of truth allowed to stand on its own. Time moved forward, as it always did, indifferent to the quiet transformations it carried with it. The city returned to its familiar pace. Morning traffic flowing at predictable intervals. Storefronts opening and closing on schedule. And municipal offices continuing their routines with renewed awareness. Officer Daniel Crowley now occupied a different place within that rhythm, one shaped less by assumption and more by reflection. He approached his work with restraint, aware that authority was no longer something he could wield without consideration. The certainty he once relied upon had been replaced by an understanding that systems were larger than any individual, and that integrity demanded attention even when no one appeared to be watching. He listened more carefully, documented with intention rather than habit, and recognized how easily confidence could become blindness. Across town, Amara Collins moved through her days with the same quiet discipline that had guided her from the beginning. She did not seek acknowledgement for the outcomes that had unfolded, nor did she linger where her presence was no longer needed. Her work had always been about alignment, about ensuring that processes spoke honestly to one another. With that alignment achieved, she stepped back, trusting the structures she had helped reinforce. She walked familiar streets, past familiar buildings, and observed the city not as a battlefield, but as a living system capable of recalibration. When she reflected on the past months, she did so without bitterness or satisfaction. The events had affirmed what she already knew, that dignity did not require validation, and that patience, when paired with truth, could outlast force. Crowley, adjusting to his new perspective, found himself reconsidering interactions he once dismissed, recognizing how easily power could obscure humanity. He understood now that accountability was not an attack, but an invitation to see clearly. The process he had once underestimated had not sought to punish him, but to restore balance. In that restoration, he discovered a humility he had not known he lacked. The institutions around them continued to function, perhaps more quietly, perhaps more carefully, but undeniably more aware. Files were reviewed with intention, conversations held with respect, and decisions made with an understanding that transparency mattered. The recalibration was subtle, unnoticed by most, yet meaningful in its consistency. Amara remained unseen by design, her influence measured not by presence, but by outcome. She believed that the truest form of justice did not announce itself with spectacle, but settled into place like a steady foundation. As seasons changed and days shortened, the city carried on, its people unaware of the quiet correction that had taken place within its systems. Crowley, passing Amara once more in a hallway weeks later, recognized her immediately, not with resentment or fear, but with understanding. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, there was no victor or defeated, only clarity. She nodded politely and continued on her way. Her steps unhurried, her purpose fulfilled. He watched her go, aware that the story they shared had never been about conflict, but about revelation. In the end, the lesson did not belong to one person or one moment, but to the space between power and responsibility. Justice had not arrived as noise or confrontation, but as quiet alignment, leaving behind a simple truth that lingered long after the moment had passed. That real authority listens, real strength reflects, and real justice does not need to raise its voice to be heard.